Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Falk.
Dr. Michael, how are you doing this evening?
Barry, I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you? Had to think about that for a moment, but yeah, the
I was
20,
about to say, I thought we were
2020,
going to have a really interesting episode in this
no,
2025 episode. Is this
20,
our first 2025 episode? I
it
guess it is.
is, it is. And so far I have no substantial complaints. Things are doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well, and I'm excited to be continuing to work along with you, continuing to work the artificial intelligence groove. Um, and that's what we're doing. And we're working this groove. Our pretext for our conversation, the text that is meant to stimulate critical discussion, is an editor's column from the publication of the Modern Languages Association, or PMLA, as we in the English profession know it and love it. This is the editor's column. This particular editor's column is from 2020, so not that long ago.
Right.
2020, PMLA, the editor's column deals with, or the title is, AI and the humanities. And we're going to talk about this editor's column. The editor is Chee Dimock. And before we get into Chee Dimock's ruminations on AI and the relation between artificial intelligence and the humanities, I guess the first thing I will say is that if you're keeping score at home, and I know you are, I know our audience is keeping score at home. I guess now I say that, but I don't know if I'm able to keep score. Is this episode 3 of our exploration of artificial intelligence?
I think so.
Basically, I think it's Labatut,
Wong.
Mr. Mateo Wong, and now Chee Dimock
Right.
in our overview discussion, thinking about the significances of AI. So that's where we were, and now we're coming at Chee Dimock and the question of artificial intelligence. After we sort of talked about the issue, we talked about ChatGPT in the previous episode with Mateo Wong. And before that, we were talking about kind of the idea, we were talking about Chilean writers, Benjamin Labit, Chilean writers. Why do I make him plural like he's schizophrenic? Chilean writer Benjamin Labatut and his article, The
Gods of
Gods of
Logic.
Logic,
Yeah.
which also, and one of the things he talks about along with AI really is the long road toward this idea of computer logic, and the idea that there's some way in which computer intelligence can mimic, imitate, and eventually surpass human intelligence. So that's kind of been the groove thing we've been working. I'll stop saying groove thing, but that's been kind of the typical discussion thread. Chee Dimock, let me say something about her before we get into her particular argument, as articulated in AI and the humanities. Um, all praise, Chee Dimock. She's written books since then that are very much in the lineage of this book, but she did something that most people don't do. She wrote a field-changing book, and I think it's worth um, saying a little bit about it, which is not on AI. The book
Hmm.
is not on AI, but it gives you an idea of Dimick's interest and the literally global planetary set of concerns that her work has always been gravitated around. So she's coming at the question of AI and political and practical implementations of AI from this from a research position. Her position as a researcher is that she's always been interested in looking at the big picture, for her is it's a little bit like Crary, right? And Crary's scorched earth thing. That
Hmm.
one of the interesting things about another book that we talked about. When did we talk about it?
It's
In
been
the
a while.
summer, maybe the
Yeah.
summer and the fall of previous year. But one of the things we talked about, and I think this was new for Crary, right, is that Crary was um, there was a lot about the environment. There was not just his usual complaints, his old man grumbling at a cloud. I say that with love. There was the old man grumbling at the cloud of 24/7 internet culture and media culture. But and like I say that with love because he kind of invents that argument and he has a version of it. But uh, one thing that was already present or new in the Scorched Earth volume is, I think, a deeper awareness and articulation of the ways in which environmental crisis kind of folds into AI.
Hmm.
And that kind of prepares us for Chee. I saw that you want to say something.
No,
And
I
so
was just going to say,
let me, yeah.
I think that in involving Crary in
Hmm.
this discussion, I hadn't thought of that before you'd mentioned it, but
Hmm.
um, I think that's a smart realization, and I guess I wouldn't be surprised if we end up revisiting him a little bit over the course of the discussion this evening. That's
Well, the main connection is that in Scorched Earth, it seems like the major ad, right? The new
mhm.
thing in that book was this sense of of the ways in which the crisis of the internet and AI, and this is maybe an interesting point of difference between Weichi Dimmock and Prairie that. Um,
that
Prairie's still worrying about social media and he's still worrying about internet culture.
he is the
Yeah.
difference. And I don't want to
Yeah.
get bogged
Yeah,
down in
please.
this, but
Yeah.
for me,
Hmm.
Crary's argument against 24/7 culture
Hmm.
feels different somehow than the discussion that Dimmick is having because Dimmick's discussion of human behavior, they're certainly both intertwined inextricably with economics. That you can't
Indeed.
peel
Indeed.
that out.
Indeed.
But Crary, I think, seems to focus more on this idea of, it was we were talking about him at the same time that we were talking about Morozov and Varoufakis and techno feudalism
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
as economic systems. And so I don't know if I'm just sort of pushing everybody into the same basket. Dimmick's discussion of human behavior and the economic crisis didn't feel to me, and again, I understand they're very well connected here, but didn't feel to me so much like a critique of contemporary economic structures and practices.
Sure. Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
seemed more a
Yeah.
case of just what human stubbornness,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
inflexibility and hubris sort
Of
of wrapped into humanity. Um, and again, I'm not trying to pry economics away from that, but I think, and this is I think what I was reacting to. It's two sides of the same coin, but it feels very much like two separate sides of that coin. Like one is human behavior, one is economic, the implications of economics,
Mhm.
which structure human behavior to a large degree. So
Well, I hope that wasn't too much insider baseball for a prologue because I have one thing I want to add to that. But I think it's especially for longtime listeners, i.e., people who have heard an episode from say 2 or 3 months back.
this was further
That's
back than that.
Like,
This
yeah, I
was
think it is further back. I think it's 6 months back. But wow, okay, who's doing that? I don't know. But if you're out there,
You
this
can go
covers.
back and you should go back and you should listen because they're amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. Um, Enough of Jonathan Crary and his wonderful symmetry with Chi Dimmock. Let me just say one thing about Chi Dimmock. Last thing, sort of prepare our discussion about, and in a way, to articulate her qualifications um, or where she's coming from on this general subject of AI. So it's interesting to think about her 2006 book, and I'm going to make sure I get the title right, Through Other Continents. Because the founding gesture of this, I mean, this really was a landmark book. And like a lot of landmark books in literary studies or humanistic studies, it's because it's an example of someone got there at the right time to ask the right question. It's not an inordinately impossible to understand arcane theoretical book. Is that she says very smart things, but is asking a kind of obvious question, a question that really resonated with the moment. So she's coming at the question of American literature, and through other continents, as the title suggests. Basically, now from here on, I've done a lot of preamble, but now I can give you sound bites. So what's through other continents doing? Chee Dimock really interestingly um, takes her field, which is American literature, and says, okay, do you want to understand American literature? It's not enough. She invents this term, the term of deep time. And what does she mean by
Hmm.
deep time? You have to frame American literary and cultural endeavor against this notion of deep time. And what does deep time mean? Really, deep time is a little bit misleading in the sense that really what she's talking about is space. She wants to get she feels that literary studies is too hampered by the notion of the nation state. And even when you open up American literature to encompass European influences or British influences or
Mm-hmm.
both,
Mm-hmm.
you're still thinking within national parameters. So her concept of deep time is used as a heuristic, and it's meant to open up American literature, and it leads to a lot of bold thought experiments. So Gilgamesh gets mentioned at the end of this essay, and one of the arguments in Through Other Continents is to understand Emerson, you're going to have to understand the Vedas. You're going to have to understand you're going to have to understand Gilgamesh. In other words, her notion of deep time requires you to think about world religions and think about culture in its planetary form and in its most antique form in order to understand 19th century literature. So she's all about sort of changing the scale of discussion and breaking apart
So
category of American literature and taking away this, but mainly her enemy is the idea of the nation
so
state
let me
because
let
the
me
nation state is too provincial.
so the question I have a question for this because I think this could inform the discussion quite a bit today. If are you argue I'm not sure I understand though. This idea of
Sure.
deep time, is this sort of like a pre-contextual context? Like if we're sitting here and saying, well, if I want to understand American literature, I have to step outside of the context of American literature. I have to look at sort of the prehistory that creates the context, which defines the container.
That is exactly right. And the prehistory and the innovation is the prehistory is not England. The prehistory is not even Europe. The prehistory requires you to think about the globe, the
So
planet, the world.
to then take that, let's use that as sort of a jumping off point then,
Please.
because the question here is about AI and the humanities. And I'm going to give a big secret away here, right? The to those listening, the the argument is that we need the humanities to be an active agent in the design and implementation of AI to
Mhm.
create something that gets us, I guess, outside of are we outside of deep time, or is deep time what we want?
What
In
do you
either
mean in this article, in
well,
her editorial, or what
I'm
are you
not
asking
going
about?
to try and get too fancy. We'll stay with where we are here.
Sure.
What the argument that she's making,
Hmm.
right, is that AI is a thing and it's reaching a point in 2020,
Hmm.
which I think we've already passed at this point,
Hmm.
where it has really complicated human, non-human, human AI interactions
Hmm.
to the point where we've sort of been it's become difficult to distinguish who's who, right?
Hmm.
Is this AI a human or not?
Hmm.
And so she recognizes that there's a power in this. And the argument is like, look, when we design this, this isn't apocalyptic in the sense that AI is going to kill us. It's quite a different take, right? That AI
Mhm.
can save us here, but in order for it to work, we need to be very mindful of how we design it. And basically, computer science and AI development needs the humanities.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think that's a great précis of it.
Okay.
Are you ready to take over from here?
Well, I don't know
It
if I'm
sounds
gonna
like you are. It sounds like you are.
taking over sounds a little scary. What I think I am ready to do is sort of cherry pick uh, moments. It's a short essay, but I don't have any intention of reading the entirety here. Um, there are a series of arguments that I think outline her position. And so, what I've basically done here, Barry, is I have identified sort of the first sentence or two of a number of her arguments, which set up they set up the argument fairly lucidly. So,
All
the
right.
the first one, she's talking about um, how we're going to fund the development of AI.
Indeed.
And the argument she has here says, but the potential threat of artificial intelligence remains a live issue. AI design is key to mitigating the threat. How can we create algorithms that would complement rather than replace human beings? And so her answer to that is, hey, let's get the folks from the humanities in here because they have a more human understanding and will bring that to bear in the development in the design of AI. So the big thing here though that she's talking about, I guess, is that she's key on design. Um, and I think I single that out because I have my issues with these discussions of big data and how we interpret big data and the idea that you can design. This really gets me back to what we started with Labatut, this idea that we can design things in a way that may mimic true intelligence.
Right,
I don't want to say
exactly.
intelligence, mimic thought,
Thought or the mind.
the mind, but it's still mimicry. And this, so I feel like they're getting trapped in that right here. And the idea that you're going to create a humanist is maybe you're going to create a better illusion, but I don't know that that's really going to get us anywhere.
Oh, but you're getting ahead of yourself. It sounds like you went
I did.
you want to, why don't you go ahead and let's go back a little bit. Let me
Okay.
help here. Just to go back and let's say a little bit more about the specific project that she's
Yeah, yeah,
describing
yeah.
and
I
that
did that.
she wants to commandeer. Um, that she says, oh, we need humanists to run it. So she specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Michael. So I don't know. I don't want to get in the way of your narrative here, but I think that she's mainly talking about the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence.
Yes. Hi.
And yeah, hi. Of course, we're all talking about hi. And that's indeed what she's talking about. And she is praising, okay, the first thing she does, she praises for 50, if you're following along in the PMLA editors column, she praises the quote unquote interdisciplinary nature of high, which quote allows us, in fact, her words, or this is the words of the provost at Stanford. I don't know if he's still the provost or she. They are still the provost. The interdisciplinary nature of high really forces us to address deep questions on what it means to be human and what distinguishes technology from humanity. And then going to 451, I'm cherry picking here.
Yeah, yeah.
To pursue these questions, High is directed, and this is something that, as you were suggesting, why she's down with. High is directed by a philosopher. Oh, I can't pronounce that philosopher's name. This is embarrassing. I don't know if I can. I'll try my best. Etchmendi,
I believe so.
and a computer scientist, Fei Li. The institute's faculty. This is the real
This is the meat of it. Yeah.
This is the meat of the part, this passage that she is quoting approvingly. She loves this. That the Institute's faculty includes English professors. I'm very happy that we're at the first folk in that list, right? I mean, that makes me really, really proud in my heart. The Institute's faculty includes English professors, anthropologists, and ethicists, historians, linguists, musicologists. Happy to see the musicologists there. What, number 5 or 6 in that list? That's awesome. I'm sorry, I'm joking. This is irony. This is academic irony, which means no one appreciates it. Let me read the sentence straight. The Institute's faculty includes English professors, anthropologists and ethicists, historians, linguists, musicologists, philosophers, psychologists, and law professors. Quote, if AI is to serve the collective needs of humanity, the directors say in their welcome letter, quote, the creators and designers of AI must be broadly representative of humanity.
So here's
This
what's
requires a
interesting.
true diversity of thought.
Yep.
Let me just read one more
Yeah, yep.
sentence, and I'm handing it over to you. Um, oh, in fact, no, let me stop there because I sense you want to say something before the other sentence that I want to read about there is no guarantees.
Yeah. So but I think there's a couple interesting things here, right? So one, as we're reading through this, I find it interesting for some reason.
Yeah.
The idea here is very clear, right? We want a broad sampling
Mhm.
of viewpoints that collectively will be representative of human concerns. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
But I think that there is a very, very big gap here.
Mhm.
There's no one here, and I don't know, this could be a Mike bugaboo here. But as I'm reading this, if we're trying to really embody humans' concerns and the perspective, there's no one here from any religious studies department. You know,
Wow.
that's a problem for me. Not because I'm trying to poke holes in things, but shouldn't we have something represented there? The
So the
other thing,
diversity is not really a diversity in
well,
your.
it's not that it's not a diversity. I think that it is diversity, but it's diversity within a still STEM-centric, rational
Whoa,
perspective.
Lord. Whoa, Lord. But we got English professors. I don't have a stem bone in my effing body. You know that.
But you are governed by rationality.
Oh.
You are a rational.
You
e-
mean not, you don't mean me personally. You mean my vocational self, right?
On
Okay,
paper,
I'll
sir,
accept
on
that.
paper, you are a highly rational creature, right? So
Right, 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 right.
there's a couple
Yeah.
things here, right? The key point here, and it's
Yes.
not that I'm trying to advocate for any sort of religious perspective necessarily, but
Mhm,
all of this is still rooted in
mhm,
this hyper rational sort of empirical perspective, which, the discussion that she gets into about what separates humans from animals is
mhm,
our rationality. And
mhm.
so in that regard, yes, this is good. We are focusing on the human here. But there's no discussion about what separates living creatures from the
Mhm,
robots, from the
mhm,
machines. And
mhm,
that is not a case. Rationality doesn't separate. There's nothing more rational than a computer. It's ones and zeros,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So there's something that's missing. This is the brain, the mind again here, right? Like we can mimic
mhm.
intelligence, but you're still just repeating language models. You're still looking for big data patterns. That's not, I don't see that as thinking. The other big issue here is, Barry, you've been in a room with
Mhm.
lots of academics before.
I guess I plead guilty, yeah.
How easy is it to get consensus?
Lordy have mercy.
How likely? So what you have here, see, I think this is one of those things where you say, well, look, we've
Lord.
got a lot of really smart people with differing viewpoints. Another way of saying that, and I don't mean offense to anybody, but you've got a lot of people who are
Mhm,
professionally indoctrinated to fight tooth and nail for the legitimacy of their perspective, who have a very deep and highly nuanced understanding of what is often a very finely tuned, narrow perspective. Nowhere in here, and we
the
talked about this
specialist
earlier,
perspective.
the
Let's
specialist.
have a word for it.
Yes,
The specialist
nowhere
perspective.
in here is there a generalist. Nowhere in there is there are there nowhere in this entire article are we talking about people who can speak across the disciplines.
I gotcha.
It's all about representing the dots as opposed to trying to
Ooh.
actually engage. And I don't know. I'm skeptical. I I mean, I don't know. My faculty meetings aren't smooth.
Um, Really cogent, really powerful stuff. Especially, and I hope you have a chance at some point to maybe elaborate on this in some of the other things we're saying, but I do want to underscore your point about because we discussed it in our pre-game show. One of the things that I think is kind of the fruit of our discussion over a couple episodes, you're working with this distinction between I think we both got this from Labatut, and I like you, I find it very helpful. There's a kind of distinction between the brain and the mind.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm not going to pretend that I can really tell you the
No,
difference or distinguish the difference, or that, if you put a gun to my head, am I going to be able, I probably, even with those stakes, I probably couldn't articulate a difference. But nonetheless, it seems like we are, and following the Labatut, we are kind of working that there is a difference, and that too often AI theorists conflate the brain with the mind and the brain as a mechanism for performing certain logical operations that are taken to represent the sum of reason or something,
yes,
or the
yes.
sum of humanity. So you're doing all that really importantly. I sense that's behind a lot of your caveats. So while you're on a roll, let me, I want to see, in a way, I want to read one sentence after the passage I was reading
Yeah,
and see how you would reply to it. I'm interested to see how you would reply because she does kind of admit
she
some of the
does.
things.
Right.
She does make a concession. I'm curious what you make of her concession. Here's her concession after saying, man, we got a broadly representative quote unquote group here. We got professors, anthropologists. We got Barry Falk in the room. We got somebody from anthropology in the room. We got somebody from the law professors in the room. After saying that, she makes a concession, I think, to your arguments, Michael. There is no guarantee, she writes, of course,
Hmm.
that these diverse disciplines would be able to work meaningfully together, or that the AI design that they come up with would translate into meaningful action. Do you have a comment? Is this enough of a concession?
I no, I don't know. Yes, it's. I think it's a very important observation. I'll say, but there's one thing about this entire the way that her argument is designed. I think she gets herself into a bit of a catch-22.
Hmm.
Okay, you're and I'm gonna I'm the pacing in my head here is poor because I'm gonna jump ahead again and we're gonna have to jump back.
Let's
But
do
I
it.
think it's important.
Let's do it.
Um, the where's the line? Able to work meaningfully together, or that the AI design they come up with would translate into meaningful action. There's a conundrum here. She states later on that humans have to be a part of the equation, that the AI can't do it. We're stuck in this situation where any suggestions that any intelligence, artificial or what, authentic, human, uh, is going to come up with, any suggestion that gets put forth is merely a suggestion until we decide to take action on it. And
Mhm.
part of the problem that she identifies here and also Franzen, I believe, is she quotes, right?
Sure,
Talks
sure.
about how we're very bad. We
Jonathan
don't,
Franzen,
yeah,
the
we
novelist.
don't,
Yeah.
we're not in any real hurry to change our behaviors or attitudes. That's why we're in this problem in the first place. So you're going to have an AI that's going to be designed somehow by a bunch of people who are somehow going to agree to get together to do this, maybe. And then you're going to pitch that to a population who is in no mood whatsoever to change, has no appetite to change, because we've got everything from climate change deniers to people who are just basically going to sit back and say it's not my problem. I mean, like, there's all sorts of flavors. How are you ever going to actually mobilize this without forcing it? And the minute you try and force this, now we have realized our apocalyptic concerns because the AI is now taking over.
We may have reached the conclusion of this episode. I kind of want to step back. So hold your
Yeah.
thoughts on
Yeah. Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Hold your
Does that make
argument.
sense though? Did like,
I think it did, but I want you to elaborate a little bit. But I think before you elaborate and close this out, I think um, I want to sort of clarify. I want to read two passages that will, in fairness to Dimock, that kind of we've given two-thirds of our argument. I want to give
yes.
the
Yeah.
last
And I
third.
think that
And part
I'm
of
not
your
trying to pile on. I
no,
think, okay.
no. But I think you're automatically anticipating the end. And so I'm just we're composing here. You gave half, I think, the answer. I just want to insert some of her argument, and then I want to hear the final movement, the final Rapici movement, because I think you were on the verge of sort of saying the final, literally the ultimate thing
Okay.
that you wanted to say on the article. So, um, I wanted to read the passage that directly relates to something you just said, Michael, about AI is great. We have a human team. But by her own admission, it's not enough. We need human activists.
Right.
And
Right.
so on 452,
Yep.
this is what she concedes after talking more about AI and also saying, and you alluded to Jonathan Francis' essay. The Franson essay does interesting work in this because the Franson essay is an essay that despairs of the human, right? The Franson says, well, the problem with humanity, the problem that humanity faces, the its the environmental crisis is literally too big for humans to conceive of.
Right.
So in a way, his article is the ultimate pessimism in saying that, yeah, here's our problem. Problem is environmental catastrophe is on such a scale that there's something about humans that literally is about climate denial and denying the severity of the problem. We still think, in spite of the evidence, unlike a computer, we think our existence is going to be a natural event and going to be eternal. But so she mentions that, but then kind of returns, interestingly enough, she kind of returns to the human in this passage after talking about AI and saying, well, AI would be helpful because AI wouldn't have the emotional scruple or the anthropocentrism of anthropoids. But then she still says, Dimock still writes, I'll read the relevant passage on page 452, how to promote human activism. If a division of labor between human beings and machines is indeed the best way to go forward. A planetary computer, I almost hear her say, alas, a
Mhm.
planetary computer is, alas, only half the answer. The other half would come from us. Okay. And then I want to read one more passage and I want to hand it over to you. So after saying that what we need is AI in partnership with the human, and an AI that kind of helps humans overcome their anthropocentrism. She ends the editorial by sort of affirming the need not only for the human, but dare I say it, the humanities and
Right.
humanists.
Right.
And so the last passage I'll read is this. EPA, ProPublica, Stanford Law School. This is at the end of her editor's column. EPA, ProPublica, Stanford Law School. These entities have standing only if the general republic respects the rule of law, a free and independent press, and educational institutions charged with the dissemination of actionable knowledge. And the actionable knowledge they disseminate needs to include not only AI literacy, we're returning to the human with a lot with a lot of stuff here, right?
Right.
A lot of
Right.
not only AI literacy, but also literacy about the human species. We need to know what kind of a species we have been, our culpability as well as vulnerability throughout history. We need to know the large scale consequences of our lifestyle choices. For this kind of species literacy, humanists, schooled by long records from the past and the outpouring of apocalyptic fiction right now, are uniquely suited. Okay, thus ends the text. I want to go to you. I want to say just one little bit
Hmm.
as a bridge, but I want to hand it over to you because you, a couple minutes ago, you were you raised really my objection or my qualm or my discomfort with the final bit with the essay,
Right.
but especially the final bit of the
Right.
essay,
Right.
that we need the humanities to persuade the general public. But you said it well, and I just want to restate it and then hand it over to you, and then we can have a discussion about whether or not we really believe this. But I was very interested that you articulated what I was thinking, when I reread that passage prior to our discussion tonight. I was thinking, gee whiz, the general public isn't going to listen to us on these things unless we have guns, and if we unless we start bearing arms.
Well, go.
And if that is the case, then if that's if you need armed human advocacy, then I think a lot of the puzzle pieces that Dimock is trying to assemble here, I mean, it's just
Well, think about what she's saying, right? Like, in order for this, and I think she's. Here's the thing. This is 2020, right?
indeed.
This is right. She's right, but
You do need humanists to convince the
she's right.
general
But
public
but the
on these
problem is we
issues.
don't have what she clearly says we need. I think there's the rub, right? So
There's
if you think about this, right? There's a line before this that just summarizes a planetary computer can only formulate policy. Its data analytics have teeth only if there are people to enforce them, right? We need a machine to tell us how to do it, but she's very clear. But then we need to go do it. And so how do we do it? We need people from the humanities that we trust. Dude, what did COVID show us? Here's a vaccine. It will keep you safe, right? And what happened? People stood so strong on their right to not
to
do
not
those
obey
things.
the
And
experts, to
it's
not obey the experts,
and I'm
especially
not
the
I'm
human.
not I'm not going to I'm not trying to say that everybody was wrong in doing that. What I'm saying is that we have so much don't tread on me pumping through our veins,
Mhm.
right? That the minute you try and say, look, you can't have your pickup truck. By the way, you can't have your fancy electric car either. You need public transportation. It has to be on these ways. You need to go walk places. You can't just be carted around everywhere you go. Oh, by the way, that food you're eating, you can't eat that anymore. You need to do this. We this country would cry socialism so fast, so hard, you wouldn't be able to enforce it with an armed militia. You wouldn't be able to enforce it under any circumstances, right? Because if we couldn't say to people, look, we have achieved nothing short of a medical miracle. Here's the proof. Here's the science. It can save your life. Don't want it. Don't trust it, right? Why? It came from a person. We and I also want to say that we've done so much damage attacking and discrediting the very institutions that are necessary for this to work, right? Aren't we trying to get rid of the EPA?
I was about to
Right?
say.
Aren't we
It's
killing?
about, yeah,
Aren't we killing the humanities? Every time you turn around, somebody's killing a program in the humanities.
these entities have standing. I got to read this
Yeah,
again. These
yeah,
entities have standing only if the general public respects the rule of law.
and they don't.
Well,
They don't.
problem,
They don't.
problem. A free and independent press. What the WTF?
Hmm.
They don't. We don't. And educational institutions charged with the dissemination. We're in an apex of skepticism toward all three of these things.
Yes.
Now, are we being unfair? We are being unfair, but we're not. We are being unfair to Dimmick in this one. I mean, uh, but
No,
it's
I
not personal. I just want to say that we are. I just want to swoop in here and say we're not being unfair to her desire to make these arguments. I think what we're doing, and we don't want to make this a personal thing, but what I think we're doing is we're contrasting 2020 with 2025.
I think, quite frankly, yeah, Happy New Year. Um,
Yeah,
I
Happy New
think,
Year.
quite frankly, she's right. I think there's
She's
merit.
right.
There's merit in the, I won't say she's right. There's merit in the idea. I think that the call for specialists is less desirable than a call for generalists. I think a call for hyper rationality is flawed. I think that we need to move beyond, we need to look at what makes us human. We also need to think about what makes us flesh and blood, what makes us living organisms,
A
right?
definition of humanism that admits the limits of the human
Right.
and the fallibility of the human,
But
right?
I don't think that you can draw that line at rationality. I think
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a
Well, I
problem.
think
Yeah.
once you say that way, if you talk about a humanism or a human that's sort of sutured to or connected in some way to vulnerability, limitations,
Yes.
error,
Yes. Okay. So I get that. I think that's all the idea. The ship is pointed in the right direction until we get to the end and we're like, hey, all these institutions, which we are absolutely destroying, those are the things you want. So, when you go back at this and you say, well, okay, this is called AI in the humanities, it, the updated version of this,
is we got AI and we don't got a humanities. I think
we
that's
don't
the
have a
updated
humanities
version.
with teeth, right?
We
This
don't
is,
have a humanities fatigue.
and that's the problem.
Yeah. So the problem with AI and humanities, and this is like I said, I am emphasizing this. This is not only is this not a personal attack on Chee,
No, not in the
um,
least.
not in the least. It's not even really an attack on the arguments. I think what we're doing is we're remarking, lamenting perhaps, the difference between 2020 and 2025. And unfortunately, the reality of the moment, which is what we're trying to gauge, the reality of the moment is that there is no AI in the humanities.
Well,
There's AI.
wouldn't this have been really fascinating? We started at the beginning talking about how her book came at just the right time,
Yeah.
right? And we've talked about that with a few other people. I think, we talked about Jody Dean's essay on blog theory and how
It was
that
just
was
at the
written
right time.
at such an
Right, right.
interesting time.
Yeah.
This, in a way, was written at exactly the wrong time. How different would this look if it was 2022?
Yeah,
If
even
she
that.
wrote this under
Even that.
quarantine, how different would this have looked?
Yeah.
Still optimistic, I think, because I think that there's an inherent optimism in the human perspective. Like I'm gonna go ahead and say that, right? But I don't know that it's I'd be very curious to hear. And so, and any of you listening, I'd be curious. Please email us and let us know if we have an updated version of this. If there's something that accounts for the
Mm.
erosion of trust in the institutions that
Institutions.
have the teeth that are required to push this forward.
To put a counter. So what am I saying? I think what are we saying when, okay, the problem now is that you don't have two things of equal weight in that title, the AI and the humanities. The question would be, what is the counterbalance to AI?
Yeah, yeah.
What is the counterbalance? What's the other thing you could put in there? We're saying you can't put the humanities in there. So what could you or what should you put in that counterbalance? I think that would be the $1 million question for us and our listeners, I think. I think we've reached the end. Next week, or next episode, the suicide episode
Oh, I'm looking forward to this.
of critical media studies, where we just take our lives. No, we're not. We're not going to take our lives. But I think we are in a dark place. Let's not kid ourselves that we're not in a dark place.
I want to say
We're in a
one.
good place.
I want to say one thing. There's a parting thing. I'm not going to get into this, but I just pulled up ChatGPT and I asked it, "Can we get people to trust in the humanities?"
Let's
And it
hear it.
says, "Oh no, it's a long answer, and it says yes, it's possible." And then it is, go ahead and query your own version of this. It sounds it's terrible. Show us, the answer is basically, sure, show us you're relevant.
Wow. Wow. I'm going to
So
have to process that.
so anyways, yeah, Barry, this was fun. Little bit of a downer, but Happy New Year, everybody.
As world
Thank you.
destruction is a
But you got us to talk about
paradigm.
it. I will say Happy New Year. We're off to a rocking start. Yeah,
Happy New Year.
I'll see you again soon.
Take care, Michael. Thanks again.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.